Welcome to the Ironcenturion podcast, a Christ-centered adventure into leadership, manliness, and brotherhood. My name is Tim Storm.
Hey, and I'm Michael DeGroat, the Ironcenturion, and today we're going to be talking about an event that happened here in Texas in February of 2021. If you're from Texas or remember, there was a major winter storm, 5 straight days of sub-freezing temperatures, and it's a perfect thing for us to talk about survival and prepping.
So you say 5 straight days of sub-freezing temperatures. For those non-Texans that might be listening to us, Michael, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, all the Canadians are not even, you don't even have to be in Canada to be laughing and going, well, that's not a big deal. It was the coldest storm in Texas, and it wasn't just Texas, but in Texas in like 100 years, and it was statewide. And it basically brought the state and some surrounding states to their complete grinding halt, to their knees.
So for the record, Texans had never in their lifetimes experienced weather like this, where the temperatures never gotten above freezing for 5 straight days. To put it in perspective, we're looking at $195 billion in just property damage.
The IRS recognized it as like a disaster, and so they extended the tax filing deadline for people that lived in Oklahoma and Texas until from April 15th to June 15th, just because of that storm.
Wow. So let's talk about what happened to us as individuals in this story. So Michael, why don't you talk through some of your experiences in dealing with the storm and what you had to go through in order to make it through this?
Yeah, well, and here's the big piece of it is it wasn't just the cold; it became a significant disaster. It took lives because the power grid essentially failed, and so the North America, well, U.S. and Canada, is essentially 4 individually somewhat isolated power grids. Most of it is the eastern half of the U.S. and Canada. And then there's one that is the western half of the U.S. and Canada. Then there's a fourth one that is this small power grid for Quebec. And then Texas. Texas has its own power grid. And the whole thing kind of came to a stop.
So and this is kind of a big shock to us Texans, right? Because we're big fans of having our own power grid. I'd never even heard about the one in Quebec before. I guess they're not as cool as Texas. And we've heard all these like rumors and stories about, if there's an EMP attack, the Texas grid is going to be standing strong. Yeah, I think this kind of puts some of those confidences to the test, shall we say?
Yeah, it did. I know a lot of people who kind of brag about it because you're right. Texas is one of the only power grids that has publicly said they've done some EMP hardening, which sounds cool. But this winter storm caused the whole thing to come apart and crash. And, there's a fantastic video actually out there on YouTube by a guy who does the practical engineering YouTube channel. He explains the whole thing in great detail, way better than I'm not an electrically educated person. So we'll put a link to that in the show notes because it's a fantastic video of just like what happened. But the end result is for many days, many people across the state had no power in houses that were not built to sustain temperatures that low.
That's the kicker right there. Yeah.
That's yes. I had friends that this polar storm didn't just hit Texas. The whole country was plunged into temperatures that were really cold. But our infrastructure, Texas doesn't even own snow plows and, trucks with salt, because when it freezes here, it rarely covers the roads. And if it does, you wait like 2 days and it melts. And so we just always wait stuff out.
We're the king of snow days here.
Yeah, we just, everything just stops for a day.
Start looking frosty outside, we'll go ahead and call it snow day. We're staying home.
That's it. We're done.
That's what we do here.
And this time, this was just not a good way to solve the problem, because it was 5 days of never getting above freezing. So the streets were completely covered in ice, which again, to the friends that live in Alaska, they're going, well, yeah, that's not a big deal. but it is
I have
for us.
never seen moving water frozen over in Texas.
The fountain in front of your house, like not the one in your yard, but at your neighborhood,
It turned into
was
like a giant pyramid.
yeah, it was huge because they didn't turn it off because I don't know if it's automated or we never have to think about turning things off like water fountains that are in the little lakes and ponds and stuff that
Which
look
means it must
decorative.
have had solar power or something because it was still running the whole time when we didn't have power. But
Right. So you lost power.
yes,
I lost power. And it wasn't just a little bit of losing power. Over a period of those 5 days, I was without power for something like 36 hours. And some of that was in like it was nearly a straight 24-hour run with no power.
yeah. When this thing all kind of kicked off, they had talked about maybe doing 15-minute rolling blackouts. And I talked to some people that was their reality, and they did have those 15-minute on, 15-minute off type of blackouts. But for you and me, that was not so much the case. Yeah, we were both kind of out of power, about the same duration. I was about 38, 40 hours total. Most of that was continuous with, I think, 1 or 2 breaks of 15 minutes of power. It was just enough to get your hopes up and then just completely dashed. So,
Yes, I remember a few of those. When it would come on, you go, "Oh yes, we're going to turn the heat on," and then it goes off before anything can actually do anything. And so, without electricity, of course, that means no hot water, no furnace heating. I had gas. I have a natural gas furnace natural gas that's pumped into the house, plumbed in, but without the electricity, you can't run the furnace fan, so it won't kick on. It won't do anything. And so it was cold
so
inside
what did it
our
get down
house.
to in your house? Because
Uh,
you live in an older house.
I do, and it's poorly insulated. It's built in the 70s, and the insulation was poorly done then, and it's 50 years old. So it got down to the low 50s, may have crossed into the 40s a few times, like inside the house, in every room, everywhere. So we're wearing all of the clothes. We're closing off rooms that we don't need. So if the power heat comes on, it'll heat the parts of the house that matter. I've closed off all the vents, so in case it comes
Mm-hmm.
on during the middle of the night, right? It'll pump all the heat it can to the places that are most important. We've got all the cabinets open. We're running water because we don't want the pipes to freeze. And
Because you probably have copper pipes, right?
mostly, yes. There's some remodel work that was done that is actually slightly annoying, but it's somebody repaired one pipe and ran it through the attic and didn't insulate it very well, so it freezes even on a normal winter sometimes. So this year I was very concerned about that one freezing. So we were not dripping the faucets. We had all of our faucets, both cold and hot lines, running at a constant pace, the slowest we could go, but a constant pace for 3 days.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for a time, every 2 or 3 hours, 24 around the clock for 20, for the whole time, every 3 hours or so, my wife and I would get up and would go turn on every faucet full blast and flush all the toilets to just and turn on the showers to use
Yep.
all of the water out of the lines.
Yep. So, and that worked for you the whole time? You guys
It did.
kept water moving in the house?
We didn't lose any pipes, but there's a bunch of people that's where a lot of that damage came from. A lot of that damage was pipes breaking and then water damage happening in people's homes as things started to thaw. It was pretty significant for some. Yeah.
So my mind kind of turned into army mode, right? Like priorities of work. So what are the things that have to get done? What are the things I have to do right now? And my brain just kicked into a different kind of gear. And I just kind of ran through this checklist of, okay, if I have all the resources I have right now, what can I do with them so that if I don't have such and such a thing tomorrow, I'm not going to regret not having done this today. And it was just kind of that mindset of what can I do today with what I have that I may not be able to do later on.
And so, what were some of the things that you prioritized then as you were thinking through this and kind of seeing this coming?
So first of all, I wanted to make sure we had water because I knew, with temperatures getting that low, that we definitely could lose our water supply and did. But so the first thing I did is I filled up all the tubs. We have 2 tubs in the house, and we filled them both to the brim with water. Prior to filling them up, I took duct tape and duct taped around the drain, and in an attempt to make sure that water actually stayed sealed in there. So used a ton of duct tape. we'll get back to that in a minute. Let's see some of the other things I did during the storm, going out on a somewhat regular basis, probably every 4 or 5 hours, and turning on the cars, because batteries have a tendency to die in the cold, and I didn't want to be in a situation where we needed to get out of the house and the car was dead, right? Because that would be pretty bad with the 3 little kids that we have here. So wanted to make sure those were ready to go. I went out and swept because we don't have shovels. So I didn't shovel anything, but I went out with a push broom.
I don't know anybody who has a snow shovel.
I'm still not going to buy one because that was probably the one time I'd need it. But I went with a push broom and I cleared all the snow. So that should tell you something else. I mean, the snow was so dry because it was so cold that, I mean, I could clear it off with a broom, and did that every couple of hours just to, first of all, get my body moving, do something active, get a little body heat back in from just doing work. But also keep the driveways and sidewalks from getting too icy and dangerous later on.
Yeah, it was. I do remember that it was so dry. I remember when the power came back on and it was kind of safe and friendly to use power again. We put a pot of water on the stove and boiled it, and just boiled off like 3 or 4 gallons to get some humidity back in the house because everything was so dry. Yeah.
A funny thing, we got, I think back last year they had some really good sales on Lifestraws and Sawyer filters. So I was like, yeah, we need some of these things. So I went and bought I think one of each, because I think the first one came up and Michael's like, oh, no, you don't want the Lifestraw. You want the Sawyer filter because it's way better in every regard. So of course I go like, well, I don't want this crappy thing. So now I got to get the better one. And it couldn't end up finding either one during this, which was rather frustrating because we ended up being under a water ban towards the end, or not a water ban, a water boil towards the end. And those would have been good to have. Still haven't found them.
So that's a good point. When it comes to planning and organizing survival gear, you need to know where it is when you need it.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. I am more of a fan of the Sawyer Mini and the Sawyer Squeeze than the Lifestraw. They're both good, but the Sawyer is better in pretty much every metric, and you don't have to kneel down and lay in a puddle to drink water. Because the other one's the Lifestraw is a straw.
So Sawyer, if you're listening and would like to sponsor the next episode, feel free to let us know in the comments section. We'll get back to you real quick.
Yeah, they're going to sponsor you so that you have enough that they're everywhere, so you can't lose any of them.
Yes, I would appreciate that because I'm good at losing things, and my wife is good at cleaning things so that I can't find them again. It's a good thing that we've got going.
So you were under a boil water notice then at some point, weren't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
that never happened
once everything thawed out and we thought, all right, we're through the woods, and the city sends us a message. Hey, by the way, you can't use any of your water. Now, fortunately, I kind of saw this coming. So so back to the tub story.
Yeah.
6 or 8 hours later, after that water's been full in the tub, that duct tape is just not cutting it, right? Like both the tubs, the duct tape's coming up off the bottom, and the tubs start leaking probably about a third of their volume every 6 or 8 hours. So I was like, this is not a great solution. So fortunately, at that point, we hadn't lost water entirely yet. So I kind of I wasn't going to totally empty it out and then dry out the tub. So we just kept filling up the tub until we ended up. It wasn't until the second day that we totally lost our water. So our house actually got colder than yours. Ours was in the low 40s most of the time, which is surprising given the fact that our house is newer, and could just be because of, differences. Michael's in Dallas, I'm in Fort Worth, so it could have been citywide differences in temperatures. But we ended up losing water that second day, and woke up that second morning of the storm, so Tuesday morning, and went to go flush the toilet after I'd gone to the bathroom in the morning, and that dreaded sound of nothing happening.
The tank
so it flushes. Yes. Yeah, it flushes, and then there is no sound of whoosh of more water coming to fill up the tank. And
you just used your one shot, and you didn't even know you were using one shot.
Exactly. And it was again one of those like survival moments. I'm just like, all right, here we go. Of course, went around the house and tried to turn on the faucets, and we've been dripping them as well. Nothing's turning back on. So I'm like, all right, this is it. So at that point, that's when we had some friends who never lost power. And real thankful. Give a shout out to Brad and Katie on the podcast here for inviting my family over. and they took our 3 kids and my wife, and I loaded them up with all of our survival food in case they lost power where they went, because we didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, the blackouts are pretty random in terms of where they were happening. Um, so they went over there. I just dug in. I was like, well, I don't want to leave the house in case a pipe bursts. Plus, it was kind of an adventure, right? Like manning the castle, like kind of felt like Robinson Crusoe, or somebody like that was trying to keep the house alive.
Let's talk about that a little bit. So, the mental thought processes of trying to think ahead of the schedule or ahead of the emergency that could happen next. That you must have been thinking in advance. I might have to send my family somewhere.
Yes.
Do I go with them? Do I separate from them? Where do we go? Do we go to a hotel, which sounds like a great solution, but I mean, they're in the same problem your house is.
Yeah.
Do I leave the house unattended, unguarded, unwatched? All those questions. How did you think through those things?
So that's a good question. I think Angela and I came up with a plan ahead of time of, if we're without power for 24 hours straight, I mean, the kids they don't understand what's going on. There's no need for them to needlessly suffer when we had friends just a 20-minute drive down the road that could, get a warm house for my kids and warm meals and all that kind of stuff. So that seemed like a logical choice of, there was no need for them to needlessly suffer in the house. Because we were in full, winter jackets and everything, which seems a little silly when it's like 40 degrees, but like that's cold in a house.
Yeah, it's cold when you don't have anywhere to go to warm up. Like you're in the place you normally go to warm up. That is the place, and that's as warm of the places you can get to right then.
Yeah. And they weren't sleeping well because, there was obviously no heat during the night. So that was kind of our logical thought process on that one was, let's make it 24 hours. If it hasn't improved and they still have power, let's go ahead and send you out and get you guys somewhere that's good to go. But I didn't really feel comfortable leaving the house just because, as we mentioned, I mean, the whole pipe bursting thing was a reality, right? So when those temperatures did start to thaw out, we both know people who experienced substantial amounts of water damage in their house when those pipes end up thawing back out. And
absolutely,
next thing you know, you've got gallons a minute pumping into your house. It's pressurized through a now large hole. So the ability to need to be able to shut that off at a moment's notice, I want to make sure that happened. So.
Yeah, one of my friends, he's probably listening. He was staying with family, had his whole family out. They had left their house completely, and he gets a notification on his phone that his security camera has detected motion. And he's like, oh, cool. That means the power's back on at the house. And, so he pulls up his phone to see the motion, and the motion that he can see is from his front porch camera looking out toward the street. And at first he's like, I don't see the motion. Where's the motion? And then he realizes that coming from behind the camera out of the house is just a constant stream of water.
Wow.
And so it's a good thing, I guess, the power was on at the time so that he could see that. But by the time he got there, lots of damage from the pipes had been done. Lots of damage. Which, so one of the very first things that I did before this even hit, right? Because we knew it was coming. The weather was saying, hey, this is going to be really, really, really cold. So I thought through some things I wish I'd thought through more. But one of the things I did do is I'd already bought, and I had it at the house, one of the tools to turn off the water at the street. And so I went and got that. It was in the garage. I brought it in from the garage, and I put it right next to the front door, so that if a pipe burst and I heard the terrible sound of a pipe breaking, that would save me 2 minutes of running time. Right, I could just run right out the front door, grab it on the way, and turn off the water at the street. I never had to do that, but staging and prepping materials. That's one of the things I did.
So in a pinch, a pair of crescent pliers also works.
That's true.
That's normally what I use when I'm lazy. So our neighbors had left, and so we didn't have any power, and my cell phone is like 4 or 5 years old now. When I was running the cars, I'd go out and plug my cell phone in the cigarette lighter and charge my phone. So we were able to talk to our neighbors every once in a while, and they had left, and they'd asked me to go, turn their water off. Which I said, yeah, no problem. Well, The problem is that we had snow, right? So finding people's water shutoffs, it's like, well, it's at my neighbor's house. I don't know where it is to begin with. Now it's under snow. So I went to the street and shut it off. And this dude has the audacity to walk by me on a walk, right? Like he's going for a walk in 5 degrees because I guess he has nothing else to do. And apparently nothing else but to like berate me for turning the water off at the city, which is a no-no. And it's just like, cool, got it, guy. It's a disaster right now. Like, lay off me. This is my neighbor's, not even mine. Go back in your house.
That's an interesting use of free time. Speaking of water, by the way, we mentioned earlier that we were under a boil water notice. Well, you were. I never was, but some other people were. It's interesting. One of the main reasons that happens is if the water pumping stations lose power, they can't keep a proper amount of pressure in the lines. And every massive city grid is going to have leaks in their water system. There's just no way you can run that many pipes and not have them leak some. But what they want to make sure for safety is that leaks are always leaking outward because the lines are pressurized. And if they lose the proper amount of PSI, some municipalities like 20 PSI, they've got to maintain as a minimum. If they drop below that, then in theory, bad stuff in the soil or around the pipes can leak in. And so then the water can become unsafe to drink. Also, power can take out, the filtration facilities. But that's why this boil thing happens, is they can't guarantee that it's still safe. And so they'll put you under boil water notices, which I was concerned about. One of the things I was concerned about with that is how are they going to communicate it? If they're out of power, I'm out of power, my cell phone's dead, my laptop's dead, my internet's out. How do I know that they're telling people that there's a boil water notice? And fortunately, that was never a concern because I could do things like charge my phone in the truck.
Right. So let's talk about something real quick. We touched on it briefly, but how do we know if we're moving into a survival type of scenario, right? Like, I think that's a really important question that we need to be able to answer. And historically, we've seen in a lot of reports that we've read on this subject that people who identify this or you answer this question correctly, the sooner they do that, the better chance of survival they have, and the opposite is also true.
Yeah, absolutely. Because in a survival scenario that is truly life or death survival, every moment counts, and the more you can use those moments early, better too, because your energy is higher earlier. And so we teach this at some of our events, our operations that are specifically survival themed. And these 4 key ideas. These come from a guy on YouTube. First exposed me to this. His name's Toby Cowern, and he points out these 4 that this is what puts you in a survival scenario. And the benefit of having a matrix like this is that hopefully you can identify it sooner because they kind of sneak up on you. And I'll explain that when I list the 4. So the first is imminent threat to life. Well, how does that sneak up on you? I'll come back to that one. But imminent threat to life, you're in some danger. The second is minimal resources or equipment. So you have a limitation in supplies. We certainly saw that during the freeze. Roads were hard to navigate. Stores were closed or empty. You couldn't buy things at some places. It was definitely an example. Didn't have water, didn't have power, right? The stuff we're used to relying on, limited. Number 3, no immediate escape. So no easy way to just to go somewhere else. And that was generally true for most people across the state. There wasn't just just go to the place where the heat's on. There were some warming stations that were being set up by disaster relief. But for the most part,
this was a regional disaster, right? So, so Oklahoma's experiencing this, Louisiana's experiencing this. Like,
right.
People all around us, it wasn't like we were a quick 6-hour drive away from heat.
Right. Exactly. And it wasn't just like it was my house. I should just walk over to the neighbor's house and I'll be fine. This was no immediate escape easily available. And so that's the first 3. And the interesting about the first 3 is those first 3 things are pretty commonly occurring in your everyday life. Imminent threat to life, meaning if things go wrong, you're going to be in trouble. Minimal resources and no immediate escape. That happens like every time you go camping or backpacking, or if you go kayaking, or you go out and do something in the wilderness, you're pretty much intentionally putting yourself in that situation. If you're backpacking in Yosemite, you have minimal resources. It's only what's in your backpack. You don't have an immediate escape. You got to hike back out, or they got to bring in a helicopter. Like, it's not an easy solution. And there could be there's a lot of threats to life. There's falling, there's bears, there's crossing rivers, lots of things like that that could be dangerous.
I mean, even just exposure, right? I mean, you get into some bad weather, freezing temperatures. You look at 3 hours of exposure that has killed people for. So
absolutely, and that's even in not necessarily terrible weather scenarios. Just exposed to the elements. The air temperature can be 50 degrees, which is nice if you're hiking, but if you get stuck there or you get wet and then you don't have a way to rewarm, that can lead to hypothermia.
Be fatal, yeah.
Yeah. So those are the first three. And then the fourth one is an unplanned event. And so the fourth thing that happens is some unplanned catalyst moment that triggers this. So it could be that you lose a bag or an animal attacks. You get lost. This is really common, right? Or weather suddenly changes. If you're up in the mountains, it's hard to see the forecast far away because your view's blocked. And so it can be a nice day. And then all of a sudden you're in the middle of a thunderstorm. Or some type of injury happens, right? You fall and twist your ankle or break a leg, and suddenly the 8-mile hike out with a broken leg just became a multi-day event, right? Yep. So that fourth is the unplanned event, which really that's the tripping lever. But it's good to be aware of these things so that when that lever kind of flips, that unplanned event happens, you can react quickly at a higher level of response than might initially seem merited, right? Like everything else is normal. You're just going along, hiking, backpacking, everything's fine, and you suddenly realize your bag's missing. That's a big deal, and you need to respond to it pretty fast at a higher level of engagement than you might otherwise think. And if you can realize that quickly, it can make a whole difference because your energy is still high. You haven't yet run out of food and water. They're still in you, right? It's not been days. So you've got a lot that you can do.
Right. And to be clear, I don't think we checked off all 4 of these during the event, thankfully. I think we were close, especially with the immediate escape. I think if I had lost a vehicle or two, especially after we had split up and my family's in a different place with a different vehicle, that could have changed up the board a little bit. But, at the same time, I still think we never quite checked off all 4 of those, but it was still serious.
But it was close enough that we could have, right? I mean,
sure.
100 or 200 years ago, we probably would have checked all 4 because the unplanned event would have been the sudden weather temperature drop that we really hadn't seen before. That would have been the unplanned event. But now we have modern weather, so we knew 3 or 4 days out, even longer out, this is coming. So there was.
We also knew if we can just make it to Saturday is going to be 50, right? So this happened on like a Sunday night, and if we just make it through the week, things are going to thaw out.
Yes, and that was helpful. But imagine what could have happened had a unplanned event occurred, like had a pipe burst in your house and completely flooded your house, so you can't stay in it anymore. Right now that's a problem. Imagine if, in the process of checking on pipes in the attic, you fell down the attic ladder and hit your head real hard, and now you're got a concussion in an environment where it's hard to get to a hospital, and some of the urgent care facilities are closed. So that's the thing that can just trigger it so fast. So
I think an interesting thing that we've seen, because we did a survey right after the event, right? And we actually got to take some data. What did other Ironcenturion guys experience? Because experiences are totally different across the board based on whether or not you had power. But Michael, what was the one thing that we saw that was consistent across the board, statistically speaking anyway, that most of the guys had in common?
Yeah. There's one thing it's a common all the way across the board with this survey. It's really cool. But I want to touch on a couple other things in the survey first, okay. and then mention this one, because it's kind of a neat thing. But you're right. We sent out the survey, and it was to people on our Facebook page and people that subscribe to our emails. So it's a list of men that probably are generally more prepared than the average population. Probably saw this coming because we actually had sent out some communication saying, "Hey, this storm could be a big deal." And we had some stuff on our Facebook page about responding to it and some things that we were doing. So here's an interesting kind of a range of responses. Most people were never under a boil water notice. That was interesting. Most people never had to evacuate their home. Like 85% of people never had to leave their house. We asked what type of survival skills did they use? We got responses like being able to make a fire and do it safely was helpful for them. Being able to properly layer clothing to help stay warm. Somebody said they just did whatever Rudy told them to do. That's good. So
hopefully that wasn't Rudy's wife that responded to that survey.
maybe that's what's going on. And then we asked, like, what survival gear did you use? And so it was things like a lighter and a gas powered generator, hats and gloves, duct tape. Some people were thankful for their 4-wheel drive vehicles. Some people had these cool bladders that go in your bathtub, and you put it in your bathtub and fill it up like a massive water balloon, so you don't have the draining problem that you mentioned.
Yeah, I have that now.
And that's great, because the next question we asked was, what gear do you wish you had had? Like, if you saw this coming and done it all again, what do you wish you had? And a bathtub bladder was one of the answers. Some prepackaged and prepped meals that would be easy to access. Gas-powered heater or generator was pretty common. I don't know if a generator is the right solution now, because again, this is a storm that it's unlikely to. It was a 100-year storm, but there's other uses for a generator too.
And it's not like we don't get other types of storms in the area too. And we're several months after the storm now, and just kind of getting into summer weather actually. And the state just sent out a hey. Be careful about turning your thermostat up too hot. And it's not even 100 yet, right? So we could be looking at other power outages in the future. So a generator may not be a bad call, to kind of keep your house running. And especially in the summertime, like I can put on a coat, but we can only take off so many clothes here in Texas in the summertime and still not be super hot. So
exactly. And in all fairness, I, since the storm, have purchased a generator. I have a HVAC guy coming this week, actually, and one of the questions I'm going to ask him in the process is, what could I do to be able to make my furnace work with the generator? I don't know that it'll run the AC. I think that's probably a stretch. We'll see. I'm going to find out. But I have a gas furnace, and I could have heated my home if I had just had the ability to turn the fan and kind of start up the systems. Also, I could have kept my entire internet up because the internet lines didn't go down. My router just turned off. So if I had the ability to either battery backup, which typically doesn't last days, but a generator that could just keep my router up, I would have been able to maintain high-speed internet and better coverage than my cell phone was able to do from home. Yeah, so that's some of the changes I'm looking at making.
Yeah.
Okay, but there is the one question from the survey that I really, really like. And it was neat to see this answer from so many of the men that answered it. The question was, we asked if people received assistance from others outside of their household. And then we asked, did they provide any assistance to others outside their household? And this was neat to me to see that 80% of the people responded saying they were able to provide assistance to other households or people outside of their immediate household. They either did it directly and it actually happened, or they were able to call around and check on people or offer help and it wasn't needed. But because they had planned and prepared, they were in a position to love deeply and care for family, neighbors who lived outside of their household.
Sure. Yeah, that was great. We really saw that happen in my small group. People were definitely checking on us, making sure we had what we needed. And once we got in a position where we had power back again, we were definitely doing the same for others as well. So that was really neat to see, especially the church family coming together and making sure that everyone was taken care of. And then, Christ Chapel Bible Church actually uses Ironcenturion for some of their disaster relief efforts. But one of the things that we helped out with after the storm was making sure that volunteers were sent to the right places and help coordinate some of those efforts to get volunteers to homes that were broken and needed help. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it shows an additional advantage of being prepared for things, being ready to be sufficient isn't just about being self-sufficient or self-reliant. It's about being prepared so that you can be the active hands and feet of Christ in the moment when it is needed, that you can embody the leadership principle of love deeply by truly serving others when they need it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we could get a whole nother episode on prepping, and this is kind of divisive. Even that word, right? When you say it, like there's this like almost cringeworthy reaction of like, are you a prepper? Or are you not? Like, what side of the fence do you fall on that?
Yeah, the Doomsday Prepper TV show that maybe makes people look like heroes, maybe makes them look a little crazy or paranoid, right? There's that balance.
Right. So, and as Christians, I really think that's something that we need to be proactively thinking about. First of all, what is too far? Because I definitely think there is a line that can be crossed there. And what is just being a good steward of the resources God's given us and taking care of our families the way God's called us to take care of them, and taking care of others the way God has called us to take care of others. What are your thoughts on that, Michael? And what do you think is maybe a line too far?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fantastic thing, and it deserves further entire conversation. Um, but as I think about it, I think one key principle. There's probably other key principles that we need to look at, but one big one that comes to mind for me is just the idea of where is your hope and your salvation. And if you are preparing to the level of that becomes your hope and your salvation. And unfortunately, we probably know somebody who that's the case, that
Sure.
everything that's their salvation now is no longer in Christ, that the uncertainty of the future is going to be solved by their ingenuity and their forethought. And they've got everything prepared for every type of disaster and years of food supplies in an underground bunker. And to the point where mentally and spiritually, that's where their hope is. I think something's been missed. And I'm more concerned about the heart part of it than the actual steps you've taken. It's if you get to the place where that is replacing Christ, that is what soothes your fears, instead of casting all your cares upon Him, we've gone too far. We've missed something.
Right. Yeah, and like you said, I think this really deserves a whole other conversation on the theology behind that mindset, and what does the Bible say about being prepared versus what does it say about us trying to put our salvation, make it through ourselves. There's plenty the Bible says about that. So yeah, I agree with you, Michael. I really do think it comes down to a hard issue of, are you putting your faith in your possessions, the things that you have in your proverbial basement, because we don't actually have those in Texas, but
that's right, no basements here.
Yeah.
But underground bunkers, we can build underground bunkers.
We could. So yeah, I would really encourage our listeners to think about those in that sense of, in your response to events like this, it's really easy to swing the pendulum completely in the opposite direction, right? If you found yourself underprepared, to think, I'm never going to let that happen to me again. I'm going to do all the things and get everything right the next time. Well, the fact of the matter is we can't ever truly prepare for what's coming down the pike. But what we do know is that God cares for us more than anything else on this planet. And He's going to provide a way. And Michael and I, you've both seen that in our lives, the ways He's provided for us. Even in the storm, there's countless examples of ways that I saw God's hand at work as we trusted Him to help us get through it successfully. And so we know that God is a God that can be trusted. And I think that's going back to what you said about the heart issues, that we really need to be in a place where our hearts trust God to take care of us and not trust our own abilities to take care of ourselves. Because I also saw plenty of examples of myself failing in this scenario where, had it been completely up to me, wouldn't have lasted too long. So
yeah, and if that's a further conversation you'd like to have us have, or you've got some thoughts on that, you can reach us on various social media platforms, or you can send an email. You can email us at podcast@ironcenturion.org and say, talk about prepping more, or here's some thoughts I have about it, or how I've seen it work, or where I've seen it go too far. We'd be interested in your thoughts on a whole episode, or what you think we should talk about in the future.
So as we think about what some of the next steps might be, right, Michael, we're looking at, how do we potentially get ourselves out of the pickle that we were in this first time? What were some of the lessons learned? Those are super critical things as we, as men, kind of look back on what happened. how do we prepare better for the next one? So I think being retrospective is super helpful in this situation. What were some things that went wrong? I was pretty good about afterwards writing down, okay, I need to fix this. I need to fix this. I need to fix that window that cracked, which was crazy.
Oh, that's right. You had a window shatter because of the cold.
How cold it was. Yeah. Texas was not designed for this. I did not sign up for this. So if we could never do this again, I'm cool with that. However, if we do have to do it again, or if we do have to go through another survival, because we have tornadoes down here, we have all sorts of things. Hurricanes eventually make their way up to Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex from time to time.
Well, and we've gone and responded to help with hurricanes that have hit the coast closer than our area.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. So just thinking through those things of what can we do better for next time? We'll link some of the things in the description below about here's some of the tools we ended up buying afterwards. Here's some of the survival pieces of equipment we ended up buying afterwards. Things that we realized, probably should have had, X, Y, or Z on hand. So be thinking through some of those things. Also, home maintenance, right? Like that's an easy thing that you can do throughout the year is maintaining your home. Because one of the things, we didn't touch on it earlier, but had I actually cleaned my chimney when I moved into the house a year prior to this storm, the fireplace would have been functional. But because I hadn't, because I was lazy and cheap and didn't want to spend the $200 for a chimney sweep to come out and sweep my chimney, I didn't have firewood. Had no idea where the gas key was, right? So I had access to fire and heat through abundant propane, which was flowing to the house still. Just no way to nothing to burn, first of all, in the fireplace. And, obviously, we're Ironcenturion guys, right? We can light a fire without propane. I could have done that. But I had propane available, and I could not use it. So just thinking through, just basic home maintenance that putting it off could put you in some trouble later on, which I never had expected. So.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway is I was so excited to see how from the survey that told me how many men were able to use this as a catalyst to love deeply others well. And then on top of that, it also showed me areas that I could have been more prepared to love and care for my household well, but also to be able to love and care for others well too. And so I think the idea is be prepared, plan ahead. Man, I saw somebody post online. I was not in a position to be able to help them. They got help before I could get to that situation. But somebody literally posted online, I didn't know this storm was coming. I don't know how to cook food. I never buy groceries. I always eat out. I have zero food in my house. What do I do? Well, yeah, that's bad. You just took a bad situation and made it worse by being uninformed and ill-prepared. Don't do that yourself, but then take it to the next step as men of Ironcenturion who then can help others.
Absolutely. Yep. Be looking out for your neighbors. Be looking out for people in your community of faith. The other believers in your church. So that's what we're called to do, man.
Thanks for joining us for the Ironcenturion podcast, a Christ-centered adventure into leadership, manliness, and brotherhood.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Ironcenturion podcast. We're thankful for the support of listeners like you who support this podcast through donations. If you'd like to be a part of our support team, please visit ironcenturion.org/donate. For more information on what it means to be a leader for Christ or how you can get involved, check out ironcenturion.org.